Well, that's great, Lars. So now you've told us there's something called HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but that's on its own an entire series of 15 series to get to know how to do all the code that it takes to build a website. Are you nuts? Yes, I am, but that's not the problem. The problem is that we do not need to know all of this to get started with Angular. That's the cool thing about Angular. Angular, they kind of try to save us from knowing everything. We can kind of start working with web applications without having all the knowledge of all these different information pieces that I showed you in the last lesson. Now, it's important you have the understanding about what it is, and it's also important that you progress to start learning more and more about these other areas, JavaScript, CSS, and HTML in particular, and also the DOM. Because if you want to be a real good web developer, you need to know more than just Angular in my mind. It's not enough just to know about Angular. You also have to know how you get data from a backend. That's what we talked about earlier with the REST API, so that's also part of being a good web developer. So it's not enough just to know about Angular, but it's also nowadays not enough just to know how to write with these languages in my mind. It's also important that you understand some of the other frameworks out there that can kind of build a web application without you having to write everything from scratch, because nobody does that. You don't have to sit down and write everything from scratch anymore. There are tools out there that can help you build front-end applications, and they are kind of the same. So if you know one, you kind of know them all. Just like switching from Java to C#, there are some things that are the same and some things that are different, but they're kind of the same. So let me just try and show you some of the other guys on the market that are very, very cool and that are kind of similar to what we're going to do with Angular. So first of all, there's Vue.js, upcoming guy. Right now he's struggling to get to the top of the list. He's starting to really gain speed and gain momentum, and it's a very cool framework. I just work with it a little bit, so I'm not an expert here, but it's a cool framework if you want to build a web application in pure JavaScript or ECMAScript. We'll talk more about the difference between JavaScript, ECMAScript, and TypeScript later on. That's a cliffhanger right there, but this is written in pure JavaScript. So if you're really into JavaScript, this is the go-to guy. If you don't want to learn about TypeScript, this is the go-to guy in my mind. Then there's React. That's somebody called Facebook's little child, so that's being backed up by them. Vue is an independent right now from the different frameworks right now, I think. So he doesn't have a huge backer right now, but React is Facebook. They have that as the backer, and they have a lot of cool things. Really, really powerful framework as well. I have not used it that much. I've built a few applications in it. You have to have more than just React to build a React application, so you have to learn a few more helper frameworks, but it's not complex compared to Angular, not at all. They're the same in a learning level, I think. So that's another way to go. That's React if you want to do that. And then the last one is, of course, the one I want to work with, which is Angular. Now, Angular has had a bit of history. I'll just run over it in the next lesson, but Angular as it is right now is extremely powerful. They really turned the tide. They almost, in my mind, sank themselves when they switched from the version 1 of Angular to version 2. I'll explain that next lesson. But now they're kind of getting up again. They're getting traction again. People love Angular now again. And this is, at least in Denmark, one of the known frameworks that people start using out there. More and more developers are required to build this when we want to make web applications. So it's the same with the React. I also hear a lot of people using that, and Vue is less famous right now, but it's getting there. So Angular and React is very, very popular frameworks. So go and learn one of them. If you don't want to learn Angular, go and look at some of the others. That's really, if you want to be a web developer, please do that. So enough about that. Let's try and actually talk more in depth about Angular now. Now you know there are more frameworks out there, and there's also a lot of frameworks I didn't even talk about that's ready for building this. We have in ASP.NET, we have the MVC framework. I don't think it's as powerful as these guys yet, but they might get traction. That's Microsoft, right? Microsoft also with Google has their hands in Angular. So I think Angular has the backup power with Google and Microsoft behind them. So I think I'm going to wrap it up right here. I could talk a lot more about this, but let's instead start diving into Angular and have a talk about how we can build Angular applications. See you next time.